to She Can. Today we're joined by the incredible Katy McNair, also known as ADHD Mum Rules. You may know her from Instagram, where she shares all of the wild and wonderful life of ADHD. Welcome, Katy.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks so much for coming. So I think the best place for us to start is by you telling us a little bit more about your ADHD diagnosis. I feel like ADHD is something that we're so much more aware of now than we ever were. You know, when we were at school, it wasn't a thing that we spoke about that much, but now it's definitely more in the public domain. So tell us more about your experience with it and how you started, realising that you were ADHD.
Okay. Well, I would agree it's definitely something that I did not think about while I was at school. It was not something that was in my mind at all. If there was any awareness of it, vaguely in my mind, it was definitely something that boys had. And to me, it was badly behaved boys who couldn't sit still, who might get in trouble at school.
Uh-huh.
And that was all I really, if I ever give a moment's thought to ADHD, which I generally did not. And at school, I was very sporty, I was very active, I was very enthusiastic, I was into everything, I had a million hobbies, I was busy. I had an older brother, I was quite a tomboy, so running around, burning off a lot of energy, trying my absolute best at everything that came my way. And I was actually quite a successful student and did pretty well at school. So had no reason really to consider it as something that related to me, because ADHD, by the time people come to get a diagnosis, it's often due to there being a more obvious struggle. By the time you get a diagnosis, it's because you are not coping often, or it's more of an obvious deficit as opposed to a strength. Whereas at school, I think that my strengths were coming to the fore because I was self-medicating without realising. I had a dad and a mum who were both teachers, and so they were very good at keeping my energy and my enthusiasm directed towards the right things. And so it wasn't until I had children that even this began to become something I became aware of. I have 2 children, and motherhood was a huge change for me, which I think it is for everyone.
Uh-huh.
And you don't really know if you're doing it right. You don't have any idea if what you're experiencing is the same as what everyone else is experiencing. But from reasonably early doors, we had an expression in our household was, we think there's something, just this something.
Uh-huh.
And we weren't really sure what it was. But it went for 6 years or so before we actually received an assessment for one of my children. And it was an autism assessment, and that kind of opened the door to even beginning to learn about neurodivergence at all. And then I think this is a very common story for mothers and late diagnosed people, that it's often a child that causes this opening of a door, this light bulb to go off, and you sit in an assessment and you listen to the questions and you see what your child does and you go, oh, so definitely.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I was 43 when I was diagnosed. And it was also in part due to a friend of mine who I didn't ask anyone else about it for a really long time. And when I eventually did this something that I wasn't quite clear on what it was, I asked a friend of mine, Marissa, and she was so amazing in that moment. She immediately, huge warm smile, just leant right in and was like, I am so happy that you have asked me about this. Let me tell you everything I know, because she had a son who had been assessed for ADHD.
Okay.
And everything she told me was so wonderful and so useful. And I'm so grateful to her to this day, because if she had not had that conversation with me, I might never be here. And so I think then starting the channel when I eventually received my own diagnosis, I think one of the reasons I did it is because I kind of wanted to be Marissa for other people. She was just so helpful to me, and I realised that there's a huge swathe of the population who are probably like me, not considering things that they could that might change the way they go about living their day-to-day for the better.
Yes. And that is the voice that you've become, that voice of this is what you might experience, this is how to overcome it. You've become that for so many people. So let's talk about what exactly ADHD is, because there'll be a lot of people listening to this probably who they know some of the symptoms of it, but they don't why does it happen?
Yeah. I don't think there is an answer on why it happens. There's a lot of research that goes into neurodivergence and this idea of, can we find one reason behind it? And there isn't one reason behind it. We do know it's runs in families.
Okay.
And I think I probably want to preface everything I say here with the fact that I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who can diagnose people. I am simply someone with lived experience of a late diagnosis, living in a family that is neurodivergent. So really everything I say should be listened to with that in mind. But ADHD, well, it's to do with being hyperactive, or it can be. It's to do with finding it hard to focus, so having what is called an attention deficit, although a lot of people would argue that actually it's having too much attention and that it's just misdirected attention. So, for example, the typical view of the kid that's kind of just a little bit away with the fairies, not really clued into what's happening. They might be daydreaming or not really listening, not focused. That might be one presentation for sure. But it also might be that that kid is being distracted by the noise of the air conditioning or the traffic or the wind in the trees or the breathing of the person next to them or the person in the front row clicking their pen or the footsteps in the corridor outside.
Yeah.
And so actually they've got a huge amount of attention. It's just that it's not being directed at the thing that theoretically is meant to be the most important thing in the room, which is the teacher.
Okay.
So I think that's something about symptoms and like the name of ADHD, which can be really illuminating, is that you have the kind of idea of, yes, it's to do with potentially being hyperactive. So that might look like running around, not being able to sit in your chair, having a highly active lifestyle, sure. But also it can look like hyperactivity in your brain.
Yeah.
So you might sit there reasonably calmly on the surface, you know, that analogy of the duck or the swan on the top of the water. It all looks very serene, but inside there is a lot happening.
Paddling.
The paddling is just, yeah, it's going at a rate of knots in there. You've got jokes going through your head, you've got thoughts going through your head, you've got ideas, you've got songs, you've got adverts from the 80s in my case, you've got so many things happening. You've got worries, you've got anxieties, you're thinking about later, you're imagining a storyline, you're scripting your next TV pilot. It's all going on in there. And other people don't necessarily know. You might also be thinking, just listen to what this person is saying, don't interrupt them. What did they say? I've lost the trail of thought. And so again, this hyperactivity can be experienced in many different ways. Just like your idea of being a bit sort of spaced out, the spaced out kid can also be experienced in different ways, that their attention is actually being put on other things. And then there's symptoms, things like RSD, which is something that people are beginning to pay a lot more attention to now. So I think generally neurodivergent folks we're experiencing the world with the volume turned up.
Okay.
And that can be in terms of emotions as well. And I definitely experienced that, this idea of not wanting to be rejected and perceiving things that are said or done maybe differently with an extra edge, having a very high awareness of any small change in the room in terms of the vibe or how people's expressions or what might have happened, and then immediately thinking, well, is it my fault? Have I done something wrong? Does this mean they don't like me? Have I over-explained myself? Have I under-explained myself? There's a lot going on that can make you start to question if you've done the right thing, I guess, and feel rejected. And for me also, rejection sensitivity showed up as a kid of the idea of not winning or failing in any way or not being the best possible kid in the room was painful to me. And so if you put down an expectation in front of me, I'm going to meet that expectation, because the thought of not meeting it is very uncomfortable.
Okay.
So there's things like RSD, then there's things like executive function. So working memory. So things like that might be, you might have tasks that you need to do and you just feel overwhelmed about how to prioritize. What should you do first? How do you break that down into steps? And you just don't begin because you just can't figure it out, and it's mixed up with so many other things in your mind, or you might start and then wander off. You can be distracted very easily. Time blindness. So you can think you're going to be on time and then all of a sudden you lose a few hours because you became hyper-focused on something or distracted by something that wasn't part of the plan. So there's so many elements of it. And I think the saying always goes with neurodivergent people that if you meet one person with ADHD, if you meet one person with autism, if you meet one person with dyslexia, you've met one person, because everyone experiences it differently depending on their environment, depending on their upbringing, nature and nurture. It has elements to play for everybody. And so different strengths and struggles can be experienced depending on what your life has been like and what environment you're in right now, and what coping strategies you developed when you maybe didn't know. So, yeah, I think that's one of the issues as well with ADHD, and probably the reason why I didn't consider myself to even be relevant for an assessment is because I had very particular views of what hyperactivity looked like, what being distracted or someone who didn't follow through, what that looked like, having a lack of impulse control as well is a big one. And I thought, well, I'm containing myself really well. I am very self-contained. I don't think I'm impulsive at all because I'm trying so hard not to be. And that's the thing, that you can be trying so hard to not do the things at personal cost.
Yes.
And so you miss the fact that a diagnosis is there because you're working double time, triple time to appear neurotypical.
And that's very common in schools, isn't it? That boys versus girls in particular, often in boys it manifests as, you know, a kind of hyperactive, the boy that can't sit down in school versus the girl who's kind of daydreaming, or if only Maggie would apply herself in school. I used to get that. And it's probably, there must be so many women in particular out there who have just never realised that this is a possibility for them. And now, because of pages like yours and because of raising awareness that's happening now, people are starting to feel seen.
Yes, I really hope so. I think that's definitely something I want to try and do. And I think part of it as well was almost me trying to be seen as well. It was kind of unmasking in a public way. It's quite weird when you have a late diagnosis because then you kind of meet the world and people afresh and you think, do I tell people or do I not? And if I do tell people who've known me a long time, will they even accept what I'm saying to be true because they know a particular version of me and they've maybe not seen things that I've worked really hard to keep under wraps because I learned young that those things were frowned upon.
Yes.
And if I begin to let that all out and just be who I actually am, will they think I'm putting on an act now that I have this diagnosis? It's quite a strange relearning of yourself and what you have done to put in place coping mechanisms if you get a late diagnosis. And so letting people see and letting myself see that you can talk about these things that you do, how you're always late, how you can't remember where you've put anything, how your house is a bomb site and you're meant to be this great mother, can help other people feel less alone. And also I think there are so many strengths that you can have if you're in the right environment and you're accommodated correctly. And so I just want people to be aware of their strengths and their struggles and to be able to advocate for themselves, my children included, and for neurotypical people to understand that if you can be accommodating in these ways that really don't take very much, everyone is going to have a much better time because we're not taking away from neurotypical people by asking for accommodations. If you're giving the accommodations in the workplace, for example, that neurotypical people might think, well, why would you want to have noise cancelling headphones? Or why would you want to be able to have a quiet space? Or why would you want to have your instructions written down step by step rather than just talking it through in a meeting? If those things are given to neurodivergent people, you'll probably find that neurotypical people they also have their own strengths and struggles, can also lean towards their strengths. And we can all just be as accommodating of each other as possible. We're all going to win, really.
Absolutely. There's so much shame and stigma attached to ADHD in general, but also some of those behaviours that manifest, as part of ADHD that you mentioned, things like being late, we must never be late, we must always be on time, we must always keep a nice, clean, tidy house, all of these things that do not come naturally. You mentioned impulse control. I know that binge eating is far more likely in someone with ADHD, but it's almost, you can't do that, that's greed. It's these societal norms that we're told must be hidden or must be silenced. And it's unlearning all of that. And even the name itself, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's not necessarily a disorder. Your brain works differently. And that's why I love the language of neurotypical versus neurodiverse. People are different. How have you found that stigma and that shame attached to all of this as you have started sharing your journey? Have you experienced that?
I think a lot of people are ashamed. I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of some of the symptoms or the manifestations of having ADHD are thought of as moral failings. You will hear people regularly say, I can't stand it when people are late. It's so disrespectful to not show up on time and to think, I had no intention of being late. I fully respect you. And the fact I'm turning up 25 minutes, an hour late, I'm filled with dismay that that's what's happening here. And anything I would say just looks like an excuse. I've turned up late to people's weddings. I've turned up late to my own wedding. It's something that people can feel so much shame about. The binge eating thing, absolutely. So the impulse control, again, I associated impulse control with things like you might make risky decisions, which is not really something I do. I'm quite a careful person. But my husband pointed to a day when I was clearing out a bag. He wanted to borrow a bag of mine that I would usually take my things to work in. And he said, could I borrow that bag today? It's raining, it's waterproof, it'd be good to have on my bike. Absolutely great. Started clearing out the things that were in it. And it was just full to the brim with sweetie wrappers, basically. And he said, now the thing is, you say you don't think you should go for an ADHD assessment because you're not impulsive. But I would say, did you plan on eating all of that? Is that what you intended? It's like, well, no, I wouldn't say it was. And the fact that I haven't cleared out the bag either. Task paralysis is another thing that people, there's a gap between what you know you should do and what you actually do. So, and again, shame lives in that gap because you're intelligent enough to know what the correct thing to do is. Of course, we should have a freshly cleaned bathroom. Of course, you should brush your teeth twice a day without fail. Of course, we should be having nutritional meals at regular times and going to bed and getting sleep. We know all of this. We just don't necessarily manage it. And then we hate ourselves for not managing it. Because there's such a productivity culture as well of people showing here's my 5 to 9 before my 9 to 5. And you just think, I'm not even managing the bare minimum. And I'm working so hard to try. So that must mean that I'm a failure. Yeah. And there's statistics out there about the number of times that a child with ADHD will be corrected compared to a neurotypical child. And that can feed into the shame from a really early age because you are taught that the way you naturally are is disapproved of. For me, it was always being too loud and my tone not being the right tone to use. Okay. And so you begin to try and modify those things. You catch yourself and think, are people looking over at me? And the shame doesn't go away. And especially I think it multiplies when you have children and you start to see them do some of the things that you have not liked about yourself that you've been taught are wrong. And so then you work doubly hard to try and correct it in them. I think you can sometimes. And then they're experiencing that correction and that criticism that you actually have struggled with. And that can be a thing that you then as a mother think, oh no, now I'm doing the very thing that I swore I wouldn't do because I want to be as accommodating and encouraging as possible and never make this young person feel like they are not enough or they're too much in the world.
Yeah. There are so many elements to it. And you were diagnosed as a mother after going through this with your children. Did you feel a sense of freedom when you were diagnosed a sense of, oh, thank God, this is what's been going on my whole life?
I wouldn't say it was as simple as that, but there was an element of that.
Okay.
I think even going back a bit to having the first diagnosis in the family, like even getting to the point to go for that assessment was quite a strange journey, because you go for the assessment, and in this particular instance there was a week between when they were assessed and when I was given the result of the assessment. And I think in that week I really felt like I was going insane.
Really?
Because all I could think about was either this call is going to come and they're going to say, yes, this person is autistic. Why did you not bring them to us sooner? Clearly they are autistic. Or they will say to me, no, this child is not autistic. Why did you bring them to me? This has been a waste of everyone's time. The NHS is strapped enough for resources as it is. This is just parenthood. You're not doing it well.
But either way, you weren't doing it well.
I just didn't know which would be worse. And so when I received the answer that yes, autism is part of our family, it was a mixture of relief of like, oh, I haven't been making this up. It has been harder than maybe other people are experiencing. And thank goodness we've had this conversation, because we can now hopefully do quite a few things that will help this scenario. So I was quite focused on that. And I didn't think of myself really, although I was recognizing quite a few things that were starting to come through, because if you start to learn about autism, you're probably going to start to learn about dyslexia, you're going to start to learn about OCD, you're going to start to learn about anxiety, you're going to start to learn about ADHD, you're going to start to learn about all kind of things that you didn't necessarily consider when you were just having a child. And then you begin to recognize things. But I was still, my antennae were up for the rest of my family as opposed to myself.
Okay.
And if you'd asked me even a few months before I went for my assessment, do you think you should be assessed, which people were asking me, I would kind of say, well, I don't know. I think I'm just surrounded by chaos because I live in a neurodivergent household.
Okay.
And so it's not surprising that I'm not doing very well with getting to things on time, or that everything is a mess, or that I can't remember X, Y, and Z, or I'm missing appointments, because I have so much to cope with because I'm trying to be the executive function of a number of people.
Yeah.
I wasn't really thinking that actually, as well as that, which is still true, that my own abilities were not necessarily neurotypical, and that I was allowed to seek that support for myself. So when I did go for the assessment, it was more a kind of crunch point of, like, we've had some assessments here and we're trying to change how we go about our lives and make it better for everybody. It still feels really hard, and I'm not sure that we're at the end of this road and that we've discovered everything that we need to discover, and I don't think we're even there yet. But me going as part of it, it did give me a sense of relief to an extent when the report came back to say you have combined ADHD. To look back at things that I'd done, they made sense, and to look at the world I was in now, it helped make sense. And I let go of that feeling of, well, I'm just failing at this, because I realised maybe I wasn't on the same level playing field as others might be.
Yeah.
And that, perhaps this advice that I've been trying to implement, that is based on a neurotypical giving another neurotypical advice to accommodate someone who has autism or who has ADHD, I might not be very good at implementing that advice because I'm not neurotypical myself. And so to provide the accommodations that someone in my family might need, I can push myself to do that because I desperately want to, but that might come at a personal cost for me. And so to have the relief of thinking, okay, this has been hard, and it is hard for a reason, and here's another reason why it's hard. So give myself more grace and understanding than I had in the past.
Yeah.
Definitely. That was a sense of relief. But a lot of other people, I think they talk about grief, of feeling like if they'd only known this information a lot earlier, their life could have been very different. And I think that's based on kind of how much you have been corrected as a child or not noticed as a child. And I feel very lucky that I was corrected, but but it was done in a very loving way. I was redirected with such a lot of empathy and energy that as a child, I don't think I was damaged really by the experience I had of being corrected. I think it was done quite lovingly, and so to an extent, I'm quite lucky.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily have that feeling of grief of my life could have been so much better, or I could have achieved a lot more had I known and leaned into being accommodated in ways that I needed to be. I could live in my strengths a lot more. I think I luckily did get to live in a reasonable area of strength as a child because my parents were very accommodating without realising that that's what they were doing.
And it's a good tip as a parent to accommodate your children, whether you have a diagnosis or not. If they work well in a certain environment, or if they don't work well in a certain environment, just, help them thrive in the areas that they thrive in. And when it comes to being a mother and, you're experiencing parenthood for the first time, you're experiencing parenthood for the first time, and you don't know what you don't know, right? Is this hard because this is this hard, and everyone tells you motherhood is this hard. So are you making it all up, or actually are there other elements that are going on here? I completely can relate to that. We had a conversation earlier. I am convinced I have ADHD, but I have never been diagnosed. It's because of pages like yours where I look through every reel that you put up and I'm like, that's me, that's me, that's me. all of the boxes I'm ticking. This is quite a common story now for women who are, they've got their own kids and they're going through motherhood, particularly around this perimenopause age group. So I feel like I'm trying to ask you so many questions here at once. The aspect, first of all, of ADHD and self-diagnosis. ADHD is a term that I feel is being bandied around quite a lot now. Oh, I think I've got ADHD. I think I've got ADHD. As someone who is very experienced with it, you have a diagnosis. How do you feel about people self-diagnosing and that term being used so commonly?
Okay, I think there's two things here. One, I'm pro self-diagnosis.
Okay.
That I don't think anyone out there I don't think there's any reason why you would want to choose that diagnosis for yourself. I think if you've done any research about it, and generally people who have ADHD can go down rabbit holes of research. We have hyperfocus. We can get really enthusiastic about particular things if they interest us. We've got interest-led nervous systems. So if you're doing a lot of research around it and then saying, I'm pretty sure I have ADHD, I think that is absolutely valid. And also, I think you've sort of made this point yourself, that accommodating yourself as if you have a diagnosis, I would fully encourage that as well, because we began to do that before we had any official diagnoses in our family. We began to put those accommodations in place. And there is information out there about all sorts of things you can try. Some of them will work, some of them won't, because everyone's an individual. But trying different accommodations when you don't have a formal diagnosis, I think can be very, very useful and can even help you towards the diagnosis. Some people don't want to be diagnosed because they think, what difference will it make now? You can get, I have people messaging me who go, I'm 80 years old. I'm not going for a diagnosis now, but everything makes so much sense. Look through this lens. And so I consider myself, yeah, absolutely. There's no need if you don't want to go through the process, because the process itself is pretty arduous. And then some people would say, and we laugh about this quite a lot, that the process of getting an assessment for ADHD should really be the diagnostic process, because often it involves filling out forms, handing them in on time, being on time for appointments, finding your report cards from the past. It's kind of wild what you have to do in order to access the kind of support that you might hope to receive. Waiting lists are endless. Some doctors are just really wary of even putting people on to the list, because if they've coped up until that stage in life, they think, well, is there much cause for it to be diagnosed now unless you want to be medicated? So there's issues with shared care if some people are diagnosed, because you can go for a private diagnosis, but of course that means that you need to have the privilege of having the money to be able to do that. And then if you want to access shared care, if you go on medication privately, you can apply for the NHS to take on that prescription, and they may agree to it or not. So there can be quite a lot of process behind that. A lot of that is just tiring and administratively heavy for people with ADHD. And so this is my long way round of saying self-diagnosis to me is fully valid. And then I suppose there's the other side of it, which is the jokey element of I'm so ADHD me, or everyone's a little bit ADHD. That side, I don't think is the right way to approach this topic. And I don't think people necessarily mean harm by it. But everyone is not a little ADHD. There is a percentage of the population who have ADHD. It can be extremely debilitating. And so to make out like it's having a bit of a quirky personality, sometimes being a bit late, not being very good at shutting up in conversations, or I overshared a thing, these can be symptoms. But certainly people with ADHD are often, especially if they're not being accommodated and they're not living in the right environment and they're not accessing medication if they need that, are living at a deficit. They are experiencing life, like I say, with the volume turned right up and with the difficulty level turned right up. And so it's not helpful to claim it as just a fun thing that you might have as part of your personality, I don't think.
It's similar with OCD, isn't it? That jokiness, I'm a wee bit OCD, I need my ducks in a row, I need to arrange all the spices because I'm a wee bit OCD. And that's a really good lesson for all of us listening, that we can't be jovial about these things because they're really serious conditions for people who are experiencing them. Talk to me a little bit about the impact of perimenopause, because I know that often women can get through their life and everything's going okay, and then everything's going okay, and then all of a sudden it's not. Why is that?
Well, speaking from experience, I definitely have found ADHD symptoms have ramped up as I've entered perimenopause. And I think that some of the reason behind it is that when you're not having the hormones that you used to have, that people kind of talk about hormones in a way that they kind of soften you. They make you want to look after other people. They make you, I guess, more up for self-sacrifice. And I think when you don't have that anymore, you can start to think, why am I doing all the things that I've done? And people with ADHD can often have, like I've said, an interest-based nervous system. That's something I definitely have pushed down in my life. And I've kind of, although I have some very keen interests, I've kind of gone, well, they're not appropriate and I need to just move them to one side and focus on what's actually important, because that is what you need to do if you want to have a good life and you're going to set up a house and a space to have children. You need to be doing the right thing, not wandering off to the side and becoming a taiko drummer, which I did for a little while, or writing novels, or the things that you might get really fired up about creatively or passionately. You might move to one side. And then when you lose the hormones that make you more amenable to self-sacrifice, I guess, to an extent, you suddenly begin to think, wait, why have I done that? Then you want to add on things like you start to maybe experience brain fog. And as someone with ADHD, you're already pretty foggy on a day-to-day basis. You ramp that up with the brain fog provided by perimenopause, and it's like you can't rely on your own memory at all anymore. It can be quite disconcerting and scary to be sitting, for example, in a work meeting and thinking, I don't know why I don't understand what we're talking about here. Is it because I don't have the background information and they're just assuming that I do? Or did they just give me the background information 5 minutes ago because I don't know? I can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. You begin to feel a little bit like, almost like it could be dementia for me. It began to feel a bit, or you reach for a word or a fact and it's just gone.
Yeah.
Which can happen with ADHD because you're distracted by, like I say, the sound of something, or you're thinking about something someone said to you that morning, and did they actually mean it in an unkind way, and did you respond to it correctly? So all of that gets ramped up for sure. And then there's things like trying to remember to take medication. So if you're going on HRT, even that I have really struggled with in terms of remembering, okay, so it's this patch on this day and this many days, and then this one has a similar name, but it's not the same. And I have to change it twice a week, but then half of the month it's this kind, and then the other half it's that kind. And it's it's not ideal. So I definitely think perimenopause you can have sleep issues, which are also going to ramp up memory, brain fog, irritability. I also, a huge thing, anxiety for me really ramped up, and people with ADHD can often be anxious anyway. You've got a lot of racing thoughts going on. You're thinking about things you might have done wrong. And then you throw in this hormonal anxiety and it can just go off the charts. And that was one of the signs to me, actually, that I was in perimenopause, because I began to have pretty much almost debilitating anxiety for the week before I would have a period. But periods would become quite scattered because they're not necessarily on your usual schedule. So you didn't necessarily go, I'm in this phase of my schedule.
That's why this is
Why
happening.
I feel like something terrible is about to happen, but I don't know what it is, and it's not attached to anything that's particularly happening in my life. So why do I have this unbelievable sense of dread or worry, and I can't sleep? And I'm thinking all around and casting around what that might attach that to something, and there's nothing obvious to attach it to. And then you get your period and you go, oh, right, that's what it was. So all these things just ramp up, which can make your ADHD symptoms even harder to cope with, and that can be the trigger for people. There's so many triggers. It can be going to university or leaving home for the first time, motherhood, starting a new job, moving away from people that are actually, you maybe had a community that were accommodating you really well and you didn't realise, and then you move away from that and everything falls apart. Or a new job with a level of responsibility that actually doesn't suit you, or perimenopause. So many things that can trigger that realization because your symptoms are ramped up to the point where you can't ignore them anymore, or you can't do the duck legs under the surface enough anymore to maintain the serene.
You start to feel like you're drowning a bit under there.
The serene part of you on the surface.
Absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about some of the lifestyle factors that would really help in this situation. So when someone's going through that, are there any glaringly obvious things that people could put in place that would help?
Loads. And they're different for different people. So like I say, trying out different accommodations and seeing what works for you, I think, is definitely the way to go.
Okay.
A lot of them are really boring and not necessarily easy for people with ADHD. So getting enough sleep. People with ADHD are often, they're running a few hours later than your neurotypicals. So staying up late, not getting enough sleep. For me, actually, I go the other way. I get up really early and then lose steam by about 4 o'clock. I can't really function.
Okay.
So, but generally just trying to get enough sleep makes a huge difference. Also, that's a privileged thing to say, because if you have young children and they're neurodivergent, if you throw that into the mix, you're possibly not getting enough sleep because of them, and there's very little you can do about it. So that can be a really frustrating thing to say. Just get better sleep. Thank you so much. What do I do about my son that's waking up every 40 minutes? So that exercise, again, makes a huge difference because it just, it regulates you. And that was something I was doing as a child that I didn't realise I was doing. I did every sport going. I ran around with my brother. I was outdoors a lot. And that meant that I was a lot more focused than I could be if I wasn't doing those things. So I was just lucky in that aspect. It can be harder to fit that in when you're an adult and you're trying to fit in all your kids' clubs, and how are you getting to people to brownies and making sure homework is done. Finding time for you to get exercise probably early in the day is a really useful thing. Eating protein, and aren't we always told, lift weights, eat protein?
But it works.
Unfortunately. I've survived on a diet of Skittles and Wham bars, and that doesn't do me well. I still reach for sugar as a source of dopamine. Absolutely. I console myself that I could have reached for a lot worse, and a lot of people do. And there was addiction in my family history, and I knew of that very young. And that was something I think, again, had an impact on me that was almost positive, because from a very young age, I understood and I could already tell in myself, I can't control all that well if I have something that I really enjoy. To stop having it, it's very hard. And so I purposefully have never stepped over thresholds of a number of things that could have become addictions because I knew that that was a streak in my family and I saw the destruction it brought and I didn't want to go down that road. So sugar has been my tool.
Okay.
But if you can offset that with some protein, it's going to just sort of level out your bumpy ride, I guess. So then it's things like not being ashamed to ask for the other accommodations that might suit you, whatever that might be.
Okay.
Some people, for example, I have auditory processing issues. So if I'm given a list of instructions verbally or if I'm in a meeting, I will lose the trail very easily. As a child, it showed up as me going, pardon, 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 because I already thought I hadn't heard what someone had said when they were talking to me. It wasn't that I hadn't heard it. It was that it was taking me longer for my brain to process what they had said and to try and hold that information in my thought process was taking up a lot of power.
Yeah.
And as you get more tired in the day, it can hold on to even less. So for me, having stuff written down makes such a huge difference because I can look at it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And it's anchored in that way. But other people with ADHD, that's not helpful. Written down, being faced with a page of text and thinking, I'm going to have to read this, and it takes me so long to read it. They don't want to do that. They would much rather just tell me what you need. So it really depends on the person. But I think just being willing to try out different accommodations and not feel bad about saying to people, do you know what? I know you've just run that past me verbally. I really find that having it written down can be so useful. So can we just make some notes together right now so I make sure we're on the same page? Or would you mind sending that to me written down in a document after this meeting? That will just help me stay on track.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say is two things. Body doubling. So we can have quite an issue with starting tasks and staying on track when we're in a task.
Okay.
This gap between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. Even things we want to do.
Yes.
So I think we've had a little bit of a joke about this idea of like changing a light bulb. You know that there's no light bulb in that light and it needs changing, but you don't have the dopamine to get your motivation together to do that because it's boring. And so every day you look at that light and you kind of hate yourself for the fact you still haven't changed the light bulb and you're having to go into that room using your phone torch, or you've rigged up this system where you've plugged this other thing in the hallway and you've run we live creatively. We have creative answers.
so much because this is my life.
Yeah. Or you're wearing a head torch, whatever it is, you'll find a solution.
I know, I've got a head torch in the drawer down there. I'll go and get that out instead of changing the light bulb.
Yeah. So we can have difficulty starting tasks that we know we need to do because we're missing the dopamine to fire those kind of motivational pathways, I guess, to get us in motion. So body doubling can help with that, to have someone kind beside you who's also doing useful things, maybe the same thing as you. Personally, for me, I struggle with body doubling because I don't really like being seen and observed in that moment, and that can actually distract me. And so I need a very particular type of body doubling, which is more often provided to me. My husband will sit next to me and I'm allowed to swear and get really angry about how much I hate that I'm wasting my life performing this bit of administrative nonsense. And why is the system so rubbish? And why can't I find the password? And why do they need me to click into this app? And why am I meant to remember that it's called this thing and not that thing? And where is the information? I need someone to let me rant. And then also kindly say, you can get through this. Just keep moving forward. So body doubling can be a really useful thing. Or if you don't like to be seen, I've been developing this thing called the start button, which kind of is an idea of, it's kind of like trying to be my husband, but for other people, to talk you through in an audio format. Okay, you need to sort out your email inbox and you don't want to, and possibly that's because you haven't replied to 15 emails. and you really should have, or you're not even really clear on what you've done and what you haven't. And so that sense of overwhelm is stopping you from getting started. So let's just break this down. I'm going to tell you every little step you need to do, just follow those steps. You don't need to find the motivation. You just listen to what I say. You do it at the same time. So it keeps you on track as well. And also you don't go and end up doing too much, because once we get into something, it can be quite hard to stop.
Yeah.
So you see this kind of meme of like, can't start, can't stop. The switch goes from one to the other. Transitions are really hard for people with ADHD. And so once you're finally in and your motivation is running, you're going to forget to eat, drink and pee because you're in it now. And you want to keep going.
Yeah.
So body dumpling is really great for that. And then the last thing is, I think, just having empathy for yourself and treating yourself the way you would if you were your own mother. I think like I've been trying to like mother myself a bit more. I have a really kind mum. And when I went to tell her that I'd been diagnosed, I was a bit nervous about it because I didn't necessarily think that she would recognise what I was saying to her, because I had hidden so much of how I went about my life, because I always presented my best side.
Yeah.
And I thought, is she going to just think that I'm being self-indulgent here? And when I told her, she listened to what I had to say, and then she said, thank you for sharing. What can I do to help?
Oh.
And that just makes such a huge difference. If you can do that for yourself and for others, it can transform how you go about your day-to-day.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. What can I do to help? It's such a simple sentence, but it's so powerful, because for people who are going through something like this, I can imagine they've just experienced judgment for so many years, again, layered again and again and again. And that feeling of not being good enough and not being the square peg in the square hole, you're in a different shape and you don't belong. Just hearing that sentence is just so validating. And it just makes you feel seen and heard, which is really what we all want at the end of the day. And that's why I think that your page is so incredible, because every single piece of content that you put out there makes that person feel seen and heard. And even you talking about the start button, it's not something that I have actually downloaded yet. I will be today. It seems like such a basic thing, but when you were talking about it, I thought that's exactly what I need in my life, because it's something that for so many people, it seems so daft. Like, go and fill out that form, for God's sake. Like, it's been 6 months now, and it's shameful that you've not filled it out yet. So to have someone say, right, I'm going to sit with you while you click that button, put that password, fill it out again because you've forgotten the password, go to your emails and get the reminder and pretend you're not don't be a robot, and all of those steps that come with filling out the form, it's like Everest.
It is.
So procrastination must be a massive thing for people with ADHD as well.
Yeah, because you think it's associated with the shame of not having done it. And so there's a million reasons why you would think, well, I'm not in the headspace to deal with that right now. I'm in the middle of this other thing. If I go over to that thing, I'm never going to get back to this thing that I need to do. Procrastination, and also productive procrastination you can do. So, and also I can find this, I've seen this happen with medication as well, that you can take your medication and then you could go off and be incredibly focused, but it might not actually be on the thing that you're meant to be focusing on.
Okay.
So you have to be quite careful about when you're giving yourself those windows of what you need to do, that you set yourself up for success to do the things that you actually need to do, as opposed to just being productive in another way.
Okay.
So I have a video that it went viral, and it was to do with this idea of, coming into the kitchen and saying, would you mind making dinner this evening? And the ADHD are saying, yes, because of course we're happy to make dinner. We'd love to make dinner. And then a few moments later, the person comes back and the ADHD is in the garden planting something in the garden. They go, what are you doing? And the ADHD says, oh, I'm planting a herb garden. And they say, well, I thought you were making dinner. And the ADHD says, yeah, completely. And we are making dinner. We just haven't got to it yet, because just before we get to that thing that we've agreed we're going to do and we fully intend to do, we suddenly remember that we didn't do that other thing that we meant to do. So we'll just quickly get that done. And while we're doing that thing, we suddenly remember, yes, I actually forgot that my shoes are by the back door, and that's because I went for a hill walk and they're covered in mud. So I would just really quickly just wipe them down. Oh, I don't have a brush. Where is the brush? I go looking for the brush. Oh, yeah. Now I remember. The brush is actually in the back of my friend's car because, oh, yeah, I never replied to that friend. So I better just... And the tasks, you're being very productive, but you're not making dinner.
Uh-huh.
You're absolutely not making dinner.
Uh-huh.
And then the shame 2 hours later when the poor person who is starving is like, where's dinner? And you think, I don't know. I don't know where dinner is. It's in my intentions.
Uh-huh.
And I just look like I don't care about you.
Uh-huh.
And that's not the case at all.
That's not true.
No. So yeah, procrastination, definitely, because you're overwhelmed or because you realise on track to doing the thing that there's all these other things that you should have done and you try to write that.
And they feel so urgent. These things feel so urgent. I just have to do that first. I just have to do that first.
Yeah. You can be demand avoidant as well. It's because of the fact that you are probably forcing yourself through narrow neurotypical norms that you just want to do other things so badly that you don't get to do. So that's why you stay up late, you procrastinate going to bed, because you just haven't had that time in which you're free to do the things you genuinely want to do. Like research that recipe for paella or whatever it is, or find out whether eyeballs have muscle in them, or just whatever it is. You just disappear off down the rabbit holes rather than focus on the thing that you're meant to be focusing on, because it feels like you never get the chance to fully live in your area of passion often.
So carving out time for that is really helpful.
Yeah, I'm a much better, kinder person, less grumpy, if I can do things that I care about on a day-to-day basis, which again is a highly privileged thing to be able to access. And definitely when you get to burnout, it's because you've not been able to access those things. Everyone needs to make a living. Everyone needs to look after their family. Everyone needs to eat. And when you're struggling to manage to do those things and they take up all of your time, you can't access the passion that you have or the creativity. Things do begin to crumble quite quickly. Yeah.
It's interesting when you were talking about lifestyle factors and things that really help. There are things in that list that you spoke about that I just have to do as a non-negotiable. Otherwise, I'm very aware that my brain doesn't work properly unless I've moved my body that day. It just doesn't. I just can't properly function unless I've done some form of exercise. So that's obviously a great habit to have. It works out well. But it's something that I have put in place just subconsciously almost. I just have to do that. It's just whether, hell or high water, I'm a crazy person if I don't. We can't finish a conversation about ADHD without talking about the superpower of hyperfocus, because this is incredible. For someone with ADHD, the hyperfocus that they have, for someone who's neurotypical, they may never have that experience of getting into that flow. I know it's difficult to get into that state, but when it does happen, talk to me about the power behind that.
Okay, I get wary of the word superpower. I need to start by saying that because a lot of people with ADHD and other conditions can feel like sometimes it is sold as this, well, it's a superpower. And yes, we have strengths, absolutely, that we can access that I guess neurotypical people may not access. But it can be tempting to say, well, you have this amazing element, so you should be doing really, really well. You might not actually be able to access it, or you might access it at a time that really it doesn't help. Or you could hyperfocus or ruminate perhaps on something that's not useful. So yes, hyperfocus is definitely something that can exist in people's experience for ADHD, but it might not always be a superpower, because you could hyperfocus on something that you're really passionate about when you're meant to be filing your tax return or picking up your child from school or something like that, and then it becomes a negative.
Right, yeah.
But if you can, that being said, I think one of the things about my channel and how I think about ADHD is that if we can manage and be accommodated to live in the areas of our strengths, there are a lot of things that we can do extremely well. And hyperfocus, if it's directed in the right place and time, which can be impossible to do sometimes, yes, is like a really wonderful thing about it. I guess as well is this, like I've talked about, this dialing up thing. Like the highs of having ADHD, I think, can be higher than maybe a neurotypical person might experience, and then also so can the lows.
Okay.
But when you're in that state of being really interested in something and you have this flow of thinking, there's absolutely nothing that I cannot do in this moment. You feel incredibly capable. You feel like, actually, it's not even a feeling. You're just in this world where you can access a whole load of information or learning or ability a lot faster and in a more intense way than other people might be able to. And so if you can harness that, you can become quite an exceptional individual. That's definitely something that some people do. Like you look at Simone Biles, for example.
Yeah.
She's harnessed her need for movement in a way that she can do incredible things. And I think also I found it so useful to see her also in the moment when she was not in a position to be able to perform at her best.
Yeah.
To say, do you know what, for my mental health, this isn't what I'm going to do right now. I'm a multi-award winning medalist, and today is not the day for me to win another. And I don't have to. And that's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, definitely hyperfocus, being like really in love with a topic. You can become very informed. You can be an expert. You can access creativity as well. I think can be a huge thing for people with ADHD because you're making connections that other people don't necessarily make. My husband is in theatre, and a director was asked what it was like working with him. He writes and he performs sometimes, and the director said something I thought was such a good way of explaining it. Said it's kind of like trying to catch a wasp between your teeth. If you can manage to do it, like it's an amazing achievement and the results are amazing. Yeah. But it can go very wrong if you don't get it right. But absolutely being able to form this show, this piece of art, this dance, being able to become a researcher or an academic, you get also a lot of people who, if they can direct that special interest in an area of research, can make breakthroughs that other people might not manage because of the hyperfocus and because of the being able to make links between pieces of information or areas of expertise that other people might not access. So yeah, there are loads of positives to having ADHD or to having any number of these other conditions. And if you can be accommodated and if you can be kind to yourself and lean in towards those, and if you're privileged enough to have the support system, perhaps the money, perhaps, neurotypicals and neurodivergent people around you who are willing to help you be in the areas of your strength, yeah, you can do exceptional things sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. It's a brilliant lesson for us as parents, as business owners, as employers, as friends, just to be a lot more open with people, whether they have a diagnosis or not, and accommodating of how they not necessarily perform best, but how they feel most comfortable, and just really improve our communication style as well, and stop with the judgment of the lateness and the messy house and all of that. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, what can I take away from that? That would be that my number one thing I would say is just like stop with the judgment of these things, because you just don't know what's happening in someone's head. And your platform has just done such an incredible job for that. You were saying earlier before we came on to the podcast that you've only experienced good in your interactions on your Instagram, and you have such an incredible following. And I said, I honestly believe that's because people see you as their best friend, the person who's seeing them for who they are, the person who has no judgment, and the person who sees these quirks or these habits or these things that we've pushed down and pushed down and pushed down, and they say, me too.
Yeah.
And that's just so powerful. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
It's such a pleasure. I always get so much joy from people getting in touch. And like I say, I do feel very lucky because generally everyone only has positive things to say, and I can see people helping each other in the comments and being kind and empathetic to each other in the comments and relating to things that people say, suggesting things that might help. Generally, it's a really positive community, and I just think it can have a huge power if we're all helping each other and seeing each other, for sure.
Absolutely. So if people want to follow you or download the start button or any of the other tools that you have available, where can they find them? Where can they follow you?
So just ADHD Mum Rules on Instagram is my favourite home.
Perfect. And the links for all of your tools are on there?
All there in the bio, yeah.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Katie. It was
Thank
such
you
a
for having me.
pleasure. I feel like this has been a therapy session for me. Thank you so much, and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of She Can. If you loved what you heard, please go on and like and subscribe on your podcast platform. It means the world to me and means a big difference for the podcast. And if you'd like to hear more about my coaching services, you can go to megmclean.co.uk. You can also download a free future self visualisation at megmclean.co.uk/she can. See you soon.